Are you looking for a podcast where you can hear from real people regarding their real dental drama? If so, then you've come to the right place. Join hosts Bethany Petty and Dr. Rena Kuba as we dive into the solutions we've created and the mistakes we've made while managing dental drama. Let's get started. All right, so we get to dive into an important subject today. This one's been on my mind a lot lately just due to some circumstances that my clients have been going through. And it's kind of resurrected all kinds of anxiety I have over this subject matter. And am I doing enough? Am I reminding my clients enough? Am I being on top of this? So I always feel good when I start asking myself those questions because we launched the chart audit program almost 2 years ago because this was a big area of concern for me with my clients because I'm not able to adequately monitor what they're doing from a charting standpoint. And you had the brilliant idea of this chart audit program because you're passionate about it as well. And so I wanted to dig into some of the kind of hot button items that I'm seeing. First of all, again, this is coming out of multiple clients that have had some issues pop up recently where documentation was really, really critical in all of these. And I wanted to talk with you about it because I know, again, when we do a chart audit for a client, you and our lovely Dr. KV are the ones that are doing those. So you guys are seeing charts from different practices and what's going on and the documentation that's there. So I think you can speak very confidently to where the problem areas are. I think I wanted to talk about it today because it's coming out of a couple weeks of my clients having some, things pop up that really required good documentation. So I was hoping you could kind of fill us in on why you're passionate about this and then what our listeners need to be really mindful of from a charting standpoint these days.
Well, and I know I don't talk about it much because I need to be very mindful about it, but I do consult. I'm on a committee panel for the state board. I also consult for the American Board of Pediatric Dentistry. So I see things. My point in saying that is I see things, and I think, 5 year ago me, 3 year ago me, 10 year ago me would be like, is that important, or that only happens to the bad dentists, and they should have known that could have happened, and man, that is not at all the case. Mm-hmm. That's been my take home, that it's not at all the case. I mean, if it is, that's a 1 or 2%. The rest, it's everybody trying to do good dentistry, and just sometimes bleep happens. Mm-hmm. And I think I'm super passionate about saying, I can't be expected to be perfect. I don't think that's a fair expectation from our patients or then some board agency or then some institution, etc., insurance institution, something like that, insurance making it seem like I should get every bit of treatment done perfect. I mean, we're working on human beings. We're working in the mouth. So with, materials and etc. So it's, I think we put ourselves, I think I'm going to pat ourselves on the back that we are a profession that for the most part, we are trying to do good. We are trying to heal. We use our artistry, our science backgrounds to kind of do the best we can. But I don't think it's fair to expect perfection from us. And so, but I see that's where a lot of people, especially now, we've talked about it, but I think we are in such, especially now post-pandemic, it's people, and then with the not the environment, what am I trying to say? The, inflation, the economy, good grief, the economy and all of that, right? Just burying my head in the sand. I don't want to deal with any of it. But it's just, everybody is such on pins and needles right now. And so that expectation of perfection and this should be quick and easy, and any one little blip that happens and people are coming unglued. Yeah. And I mean, we've seen that for a little bit now, but I feel like it's hit an all-time high now. And so what does that mean then? What does that have to do with documentation? It has everything to do with documentation, because when a patient, not if, it's when a patient goes crazy on you, and comes back and it's accusing you of something, the only thing you have to stand on is your documentation. So we had a podcast episode about documentation of a dental incident in my office with the patient falling in the reception, a new patient just falling on, her mom wasn't watching her. Really, that's my stance and that's what I believe. And mom's obviously telling a different story. I guess she's entitled to her opinion and her perception, but documentation saved me there too. And so I feel like that's the only thing you really have. And it's so tedious and it's so, time consuming and just irritating. Honestly, it's just a nuisance to have to do it. I totally get that. On the other hand, if that's the only thing that's going to save your little hiney, when it comes down to it, it is absolutely worth taking that extra time and effort to make sure you've got your hiney covered.
Well, and I wanted to also bring out, it's also, yes, when a patient flips out and makes a big stink about something, that state board can get involved. But also, I had an incident that I confirmed with you about, I think that was last week. There are instances where a dentist is required to self-report. And I was hoping that you could tell listeners when you're required to self-report.
So this is all in Texas. So if anybody's listening not in Texas, please look into your own state board rules. But so how it works in Texas, if a patient is undergoing dental treatment or has undergone, for example, you extracted all teeth and did all on fours, and then a day later they're bleeding or they're dizzy or whatever it is, and they end up being admitted into a hospital, you are required to self-report. And so if the patient, say, leaves your office and they start bleeding and they go to the ER and the ER doc is able to, put some Surgicel in and stabilize the bleeding and the patient's fine and they go home, you do not have to self-report that. If the patient gets admitted is the key. So them just walking into the ER, getting triaged, that you don't have to report. But if they get admitted into the hospital, you must self-report, and you've got a window of time that you've got to do that in. So,
and when you say self-report, can you please tell what all you would have to send in?
Well, that's a good question as far as what all you have to send in at the moment. But I think you just say, I don't know if that's a good question. I don't know. I just gives me heebie-jeebies. I've never looked into it. Yeah.
But you have to make the board aware that
yes,
that situation happened.
I'm sure there's something on the board website that's a form or something that you've got to fill out. And then an investigator will call you. And then it becomes like any other complaint. So it's treated like anything. So I'll get into what that means. But then you have, a window. I can't remember in Texas what I want to say it's 30 days of which you've got to self-report within. And what ends up happening typically is somebody doesn't know they're supposed to self-report. And so maybe they wait, or maybe they're kind of thinking about it and they're kind of hemming and hawing over it. And somehow this month goes by and then they decide to self-report, or somebody says you need to, or maybe the hospital contacts, or maybe the patient complains, who knows. But if you did not report within that 30 days, now that goes on your list of allegations. So assuming you did nothing else wrong, like everything else is proven that you maintained the standard of care, you could still get disciplinary action because you did not. And I wouldn't say you could still. Most likely you will get disciplinary action on your license because you did not follow that board rule. So it's like this double whammy, right? Like you already feel bad that your patient ended up in the hospital. Like as if that's not a gut punch enough to most of us.
Yeah.
And then just caring about our patient and making sure our patient's okay. I think that for us is the hardest thing to go through. And then on top of it, now you've got to do all the rest of this, and it's just nauseating. And, but again, kind of looking at it from the standpoint of the board's job is to make sure the public is safe. And so what I kind of liken that to, and this is just my own, how I make peace with it, if you will, for myself as a dentist. If somebody is speeding. Have we talked about this already in a podcast? Okay. If somebody's speeding and the speed limit is 20 in a school zone and you were going 22, should you get a ticket if you get pulled over? So it's kind of like that where you're like, oh, come on, man, it was 2 over. Like, it wasn't that big a deal. And you have some cops that are like, don't do that again. You're in a school zone, don't do it again. And then you've got the other cop that's like, nope. That was 2 over the speed limit, and there are children in this area, and you should know better than that, right? So it's luck of the draw of who and how they perceive you to be. But what if, they let you go And then the next week you're driving 35 in the school zone and you hit a kid. Now the police department is scrutinized as you didn't catch this person the first time. You had an opportunity to find a dangerous driver. You didn't take that opportunity, and now a kid has gotten hurt because you let this renegade driver just do whatever they wanted to do. So it's kind of the same, like how the board, you're going to have some of us that consult that are like, not that big a deal. You've got others that are like, that is that big a deal. That too is a big deal. And so it's kind of,
Luck
it is
of
what
the
it
draw.
is. It is. And, it's like, what else paints this picture? So the other part of that analogy then is, okay, say you were going 35 in a 30 zone. The cop's like, okay, that's not that big a deal. But then they notice your sticker's expired. So how many other offenses, should they let you go on both? Oh, and a taillight's out too. Wait a minute here. So at what point
It
is
opens
this?
up a can of worms.
It opens up a can of worms. So the bottom line is, if you didn't, I have a colleague that this didn't happen too long ago, and he was leaving a restaurant, had one drink, but got pulled over for a expired sticker. Well, then the cops smelled alcohol on his breath. It was one margarita. So now he's facing all of that. So I guess whether it's right, wrong, good, bad, whatever, the point is, it is what it is, and it's not just in dental, it's every industry across whatever industries exist. But that's how I make peace with it sometimes because I do tend to be like, well, every shade of gray, and right. So, but then I'm like, well, but at the end of the day, if some harm has come to somebody, it really is the agency's job to make sure that
doesn't happen again.
Right. So how bad is bad? How much harm is truly harm, right? Like that's stuff that we're all going to all disagree on and have varying opinions on.
But really, the only form of protection is, of course, good clinical care, all of that. But right behind that is the documentation. And I know you, through the chart audit program, you have been in a lot of systems, surveying a lot of charts and looking through, is this complete? Is this accurate? All of this. What are some of the things in that chart audit program that you feel like are the big mistakes that a lot of people make?
I think one of the biggest ones is medical history. There are some offices that, they do one on the initial visit, and then the chart notes might say something like, what do people write? RMHR, like reviewed medical history, reviewed, or whatever it is. It's some RMH, maybe that's what it is. Dude, I would not advise you to just put that, because that's what we tend to put is like no changes. How do we know that? Right. How do we know there were no changes? Was there anything to change? What was it last time to this time? So anyway, we talk about that where some of our patients get frustrated going, I just filled this out 6 months ago. Yeah, you did. But, they're like, well, why can't you just say, are there any changes? But most people don't know what they put last time.
Right.
So even for an address, they don't know what they put. Now, if you've never moved, I don't know. So for us, it's like, well, it's just easier to do this form every time. Yeah. And I would say, like what we do, somebody had advised me this a long time ago, and it's what we do. We put our initials, like we meaning the doctor, puts their initials and the date on the health history. So we used to do it physically when we had a paper form. Now we've got it, through Weave that uploads into Dentrix, Document Center. So every single patient, before I go see them, I pull up the Document Center, I look over the health history, and I put my medical history comments in that section. Now, sometimes it makes it to the clinical note, sometimes it doesn't. It really would be nice if it did. And then if the clinical note is consistent with, because we have a template in the clinical note that pops up ASA, blood pressure, all of that, so that we don't forget to do it. Anyway, bottom line is health history.
And if there can be a signature on that health history or initials or something, that's even better.
Or something to customize it, right? Like something to make it look like it's not just a blanket statement that, okay, you reviewed it, but maybe you didn't review it because you put it on 15 different patients that you reviewed it, and you clearly didn't review it in these two because you ended up prescribing amoxicillin for this one and they're allergic to it, and you ended up using local with epi on this one that clearly says you can't do that, right? So like that's where it opens that why now we can't trust anything, because
Right.
if you were, you would have caught that, right? So I think now with more and more and more people having more and more medications, that health history cannot be more imperative. Really, forget a state board or forget the insurance company. Really, just your duty and your obligation and your truly caring about the patient.
Yeah.
That's why we do what we do, because we want to get them back to health. We don't want to cause harm along the way. And one of the best ways to do that is to not look at that health history.
You also, I know in several of the chart audits that I've looked at as well, there's been plenty of clients of mine that were not putting the ASA score.
Yeah.
So can you mention that for a moment?
And that too, I think a lot of people are putting an ASA score and just ASA 1, ASA 2, ASA 1, ASA 2. And the thing with ASA, of course, is that it is somewhat subjective, but it's still just kind of a general picture of something. So I think what happens a lot too, that I tend to see in these audits, is that it's assigned an ASA 2, but they're really probably more of an ASA 3. And where that falls in now, at least in Texas, is we've got certain permit levels that we're, a level 2 provider doing a moderate or deeper sedation on a ASA 3 patient. And if something goes wrong, not being able to properly manage that, then it all comes back to you didn't really look at this patient's medical history, because if you did, you would have charted them as an ASA 3. And so, yes, there's some subjectivity to it, but at the end of the day, if there are, obese and diabetic and a heart stent, and I mean, that's an ASA 3. So,
Yeah, not only document, but know the nuances of each of those grading systems, and make sure your team does as well if they're helping you to attribute an ASA score.
And I would say, like, really kind of, we do it in our office too. And I'll admit it, it's nobody's fun moment there, and it is a pain in the what to do it. But if it's not an ASA 1, then we put why. Of course, there's a medical history, so not like I write a paragraph about it, but I just kind of put like ASA 2 asthma.
Right.
ASA 2 asthma, or not asthma, ASA 2 seasonal allergies, high BMI. So just something to remind myself why I said that. And typically then when I'm looking at the health history, because in our office, it's a parent filling it out for the kid. And a lot of times too, is it stepmoms, it's stepdad, who really has guardianship? And you get into that whole can of worms there. But bottom line is, we'll see a lot that if parents running late and they check no to everything, well, I always, as I'm pulling up the health history, I'm always looking at Dentrix. There's the cross. So I know different systems have different things, but I think the cross is probably pretty universal for health alerts. And I'm always looking at that going, wait a minute, we have a health alert. This cross is red, but the parent just put no on everything. So in those cases, I go ahead and click on the red cross to see, like, is this something that was, is it still valid? Is it not valid? And so a lot of times we're asking the parent and going, hey, last time you marked that the kid has asthma, today you didn't mark it. Like, can you tell us what's going on with this? It's tedious, it's annoying. But at the end of the day, honestly, there's some parents that it's actually quite impressive to them going, oh, the dentist cares, and they are keeping track of, and they are looking at this. And it gives them a sense of, like, you've got a provider that is paying attention to the details and is trying to keep my patient safe, or my child safe. And then you're going to have, you're probably going to get yelled at quite a bit too, or a person saying, hey, you're just the dentist, what does this matter? In a way, that's kind of good if you get yelled at about it, because then that gives you an opportunity to
flaunt why you do
this.
this.
Pat yourself on the back and puff yourself up and say, yeah, I can see how it looks that way, but do you understand that blah, 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 blah. You could launch into your reason why dentists aren't just the nail shop down the street. Like, we have to, we are also trained. We had it in our curriculum, pharmacology, physiology, anatomy, all of those things that matter when we're going to be working your mouth and injecting drugs and doing all of these other things that patients don't really think about.
Yeah. So medical history, you feel like, again, that's one that comes up a lot in the chart audit. Not necessarily that it's not being done, but maybe not done frequently enough.
I think all of the above. I don't think it's being done a lot. I mean, or it could be a patient's filling it out, but is anybody looking at it?
There we go.
Is anybody processing it? Like, are you looking at it, you're signing it, or did you really read it?
Is that informing the decisions that you're making?
Yes, exactly. Is that informing the decisions that you're making? And I scary enough, I would say. I don't think in a lot of offices a lot of people are doing that. And from what I see on my other consulting boards that I help with, people are getting in serious trouble for not doing that. Yeah.
Okay.
Not to mention, I mean, a lot of this too, like forget the boards, but things that I hear about a patient did end up in the ICU. I mean, and this is not a one-off, y'all, because that's what I hear all the time. Oh, that hardly ever happens. Why isn't it in the news? I don't know why it's not in the news. Is it not that exciting to hear about all the time? I really don't know.
Right.
But aren't we glad it's not? But I would say it happens with far more frequency than anybody would ever imagine. And I think that's how we fool ourselves, going, well, it didn't happen to any of my friends. And it's not on the news. Oh, it must be some corporate chain, or it must be some dentist, some renegade, whatever. No. No. I will just have to say, you'll have to trust me on that one. It is very, sadly, it is not as uncommon as we think. Yeah. And it really could be and is anybody. And so what ends up happening is this patient ends up in the hospital. Now they're faced with this hospital bill and all of that. And, it's just something that hurts your heart that it happened on your watch to begin with.
Right.
But then the can of worms that can open up from a civil litigation perspective too.
I know one of the things is, let's say it's a patient complaint that has come up, and next thing you know, somebody from the board is reviewing this patient's case, which again includes all the documentation, right? All of the x-rays, the ledger, even a copy of the, schedule and all of that. So there's a lot that it's not just hey, let me give a quick 1-paragraph summary of what happened with this patient. We say open a can of worms because you and I both know that it literally opens a can of worms, and can even, at the whim of the board or whoever, can, have that person looking into other charts or other situations, so that there's free reign essentially that can happen. So it's not just, okay, I have a patient that I know comes across as difficult. They seem really high maintenance. I'm going to make sure on this particular patient, I'm going to make sure to really dot all my, I's and cross all my T's. Well, that we can't bank on. First of all, we never know who's going to file a complaint with the board. We never know what patient is going to go berserk. We never know what situation is going to happen in our chair. We, as much as we try to be above board with everything that we're doing, we never know when somebody's going to have a seizure in our chair, or somebody's going to stop breathing, or something can always happen. That risk is always there. And even if this was the sweetest pie patient, it means that now we've got the board involved in something that we weren't anticipating. So I think, to your point, it's so much more common than we think, and we can't just decide to put our best foot forward on the patients that seem difficult or are high maintenance people. We have to be universal across all of our patient base with how we conduct our documentation to actually have some protection built into place.
So, and I'm going to take it to, like, I know you said it, you were just talking, but like at the whim of the board. Not really. The board's very reasonable. If it's very obvious that it's this one and how many more could it be. So there are very specific circumstances. It's not just they're like, oh, let's look into this. But really their task with their job is to make sure patients are safe, period. And so the other thing, though, where exactly what you're saying, you never know what circumstance, what happens that day. But the other thing that I know I don't think about either, that I'm like, if suppose you brought your kid to me and you didn't like what I had to say and you filed a complaint, but then you went down to my colleague down the street and you sought care there and you complained against me, well, they're going to look at who all before and after, you saw, so that they can look into, does this make sense? So for example, if you were like, she's way too aggressive and she treatment overdiagnosed and I think she's a danger to patients because she's just trying to get money by overdiagnosing. And the second dentist I went to only said I needed 2 fillings instead of the 10 fillings that Cuba said I needed. So they're going to want to see the evidence from both dentists. So I could get my records audited
without even the complaint being against you.
Without the complaint being against me. Yeah, I'm the second opinion dentist, and now I got to send all my stuff in because of the complaint that was issued. The other thing, and it's horrifying to think about, but now, like, even staff, like, that's why, again, I tend to be a rules follower. So I've always been a rules follower, but I've heard so many stories along the way about an assistant that's disgruntled, a front desk that's disgruntled, and you just don't know who your enemies are out there. Right. And so if I am above board, or at least trying to be, then usually, you can have some sense of security there, because you never know who's going to say what about you.
Yeah. Well, and even down to, there was a couple situations that came up in my last couple weeks of work where down to, like, we've got our clinical, chart note and documentation, but then we've also got, if we charged out, 4 bite wings, but we had a rascal of a patient and really couldn't get all 4 bite wings and ended up taking 2, but we didn't adjust that ledger to reveal that we took 2 instead of 4. Again, even the documentation goes down to that level where we've got to show consistency, that ledger also shows what we did is what we actually did.
Yeah. And a lot of times that's another violation tacked on. Standard of care not met in diagnosing decay, violation of unfair dealing, charged the patient for 4 bite wings and it was just 2 bite wings, didn't self-report on time. I mean, it's like, that's where, again, and it's kind of like that car example again. Is it my light and my sticker and I was going 3 over the speed? Like, at what point is this a dangerous driver and a menace to society, or is this a person that just kind of, oh shucks, got everything kind of wrong all happen at the same time? It's like, you're going to be judged by different people in different ways, and the person that's like, oh, well, that happens to me all the time, I could see how that could happen. Or do you get the person that's like, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard, I don't speed, my sticker's never late, and you are a moron and shouldn't be on the road. So it's you're opening yourself up. We are going to have to be open to being scrutinized by insurance, by a patient complaint, by the next dentist who the patient moves, to another city, and that dentist is looking through your chart notes. And anyway.
How important is it that the chart note is completed on the day the patient was seen? I get this question a lot.
I don't know the answer to that. I don't know that there's an actual rule or law. I think the issue, though, is the later it's done, it's more likely going to be viewed as, what is the accuracy? Because we know we may not remember it. The other thing is, did you get lucky enough that if something happened, does it look like you're covering your tail? So if the patient, I don't know, complained about something the next day, but then you get back to the chart note 5 days later, and now it's like, oh, you're justifying what happened.
Right.
As opposed to, you just got it done. So I just
cast doubt on.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. That's like, or a modified note, forget it. You've lost all credibility.
Yeah.
So I think, to me, if I was reading something and I saw that there was a note made 5 days later or 4 days later, and nothing transpired in that time, and I can corroborate that with, is there a journal note made about it? What does the patient have to say about it? All of that. But God bless, is it just not easier to have it done at that moment and be done with it, so you don't have questions coming in about it? You might be able to explain it away, but you've just opened yourself up more headache.
It's just another level of risk.
Yeah.
It's a risk you're taking with that delay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anything else that you can think of that would be helpful for our listeners from a charting documentation tip or standpoint?
I know we talked about health history. We talked about ASA, vitals, like just making sure you've got all of that. I think, anything under, like, in Texas Dental Practice Act, any of the things that we're supposed to be putting in there, I would make sure you have in there, like, what were your findings? Like, you might just took 2 bite wings. Okay, but what were your findings? And I think for most dentists, we're like, well, duh, it's on the chart. Like, I charted it. Those were my findings. Like, that's what it was. But I think just x-rays interpreted, decay charted.
Yeah.
So when you have a more thorough picture, you look more thorough.
Yeah.
If you've got bare bones, then you leave yourself open to a lot more people guessing and judging and assuming. And that's where it gets really tricky. So
Well, and you and I have talked about this a lot, but I think that complete picture, which is what anytime I'm kind of looking for, we're talking about a difficult patient in a practice, and so I'm coaching the team on how to deal with that difficult patient. One of the things I'll do is I'm like, okay, let me get some history on this patient first so that I know how to properly advise the team on how to deal with this patient. And so I might be reading through, and if I can't, as an outsider who doesn't know this patient, if I can't get into those chart notes and make sense, make a complete picture of what actually happened with this patient, including what the patient said, what we diagnosed, what we recommended, did we recommend alternatives? If we didn't recommend alternatives, why did we not recommend it? And I can't tell you how many times I get in there and I'm like, well, based on the note, the patient should be confused. Because it doesn't look like I don't see anywhere where you said that the patient was able to ask questions or the patient stated that they understood the treatment and alternatives. And I don't see, well, but they did. Well, but you didn't say that in the note. So that's just off your memory, you're saying that?
Right. And then that's where it becomes tricky too, because it's like you could throw in templates, because we have that, and the staff will all throw in templates. I'm like, get this garbage out of there. Like, get rid of all of this and put some actual things. We gave mom the pros and cons of fillings and SSCs, showed her models. And then a lot of times I elaborate more, and other times I'm like, it's pretty obvious. Like, but then I do, now we're talking about it, I'm like, is it pretty obvious, or is it just obvious to me? Because it was in my own head.
Right.
Like, but is somebody else going to be able to read what was going on in my head based on this chart note? The other thing that I think that you're saying that I see a lot in our chart audits, and it's one that always makes me laugh kind of, because I think when I say it out loud, saying, consent forms, and I think all of us are going to go, no, duh, we know we need to do that. Why are you even talking about it? But something about knowing it and on paper, literally on paper, but just like, we're all like, duh, like that's risk management 101, have a consent form. But to actually have the consent form, because we all know what happens in an office day to day. Somebody was supposed to get the consent form and then they forgot, or we added something and we verbally consented, but it never made it to the paper consent. How many times am I having to write off? It just happened yesterday again, where the parent's like, can you just go ahead and take the tooth out? Just flick it out. She's ready for it to go. And like, we put some tack and we flick it out. Well, damn it. Can I build that out as because we did take the time. You were in the chair, 5-ish minutes longer. We did have to take our tack that's expensive, like our numbing jelly. But I never had you sign a consent form for it. So now because that happened to us the other day, and the mom called back because she was going to owe $36, something like that. And I have it very clearly in my notes. Mom was like, please get the tooth out, please, blah, blah, blah. But did I ever tell her how much it was going to cost? Mm-hmm. And I didn't.
Yeah.
So we're writing that off.
Yeah.
But I did it again yesterday. I did not get a consent form for it, and I should have. Yeah. But we had a second one in the day, and I did get a consent form for that one. I was like kicking myself over the first one. Yeah. But I shouldn't have even had the first one. So anyway,
and do treatment plans count as consents?
No. And why is that then? Because I kind of look at that too. I'm like, you obviously knew you were getting an occlusal composite on 30. You signed for it, you paid for it. What do you mean you didn't know you were going to get occlusal composite? But where it's different then is the treatment plan is saying that yes, they paid for 30, but the consent form is, here are the risks associated with getting your endo, your extraction, your filling, like whatever it is. Here are the risks. And so if you didn't review the risks with the patient, then that's what you're getting in trouble for with the consent.
Yeah.
So my advice, have both. I don't think there's a rule about getting a treatment plan signed.
No.
So that's on you if you feel like doing that. Mm-hmm. To me, I do that to show the patient, yeah, you did. What do you mean you didn't know you were getting an occlusal composite on 30? You signed for it right here. Mm-hmm. So that to me is what I use the treatment plan form, signed treatment plan for. That's why I get it signed, but it's not consent. Because the treatment plan just tells you what you're about to do, but it does not go into the risks of, if you're extracting a tooth, you could break it at the, bone level and end up with a root tip and blah, blah. It didn't go into all of those things, that you could anesthetize and get into a vessel and have a hematoma. And so that's where that's where the patient gets you on that. Well, I didn't know that.
And then we don't have a document that shows that we went over all of that. So
right.
I get that question all the time. Well, no, but we got the treatment plan signed. Not a consent.
Yeah, that's not a consent. Yeah. And so it's infuriating, But when you look at it that way and go, yeah, you're right, I guess they're not consenting to the fact that they could have a reaction to the blah, 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 blah. I don't know. Whatever's in our consents, like all of that stuff that none of us ever wants to look at. Because we're also told that, if we were in civil litigation, it wouldn't hold up. State board wise, you get a consent signed, you're good. You're golden. They're not going to touch you. They're not going to talk to you about it if it's on the consent form. But in civil litigation, it could be like, well, nobody reviewed this with me. It wasn't in the language I preferred. It wasn't every 2 million details that could have gone wrong weren't listed. This only had 1,999,000, but it didn't have that. You know what I mean? Like that's where, so I can see where, it's a nuisance, but I think it's fair to say all of us know, and we laugh about it like, what chump isn't getting consent forms? Probably you.
Yeah.
And I'm looking at myself saying that and talking to each and every listener. I don't know that you get consent forms on every single procedure.
And
we try to. We know we need to. We know we want to.
Are you checking that?
Right.
Right? So that's where we kind of, of course my staff is getting that. But are you checking that? Are you, we even talked a few weeks ago about, making sure that your associates are going back and checking. Is everything accurate? Is that ledger accurate? Is that note the way that you want it to be? I mean, it really is, the responsibility falls on the administering doctor and, of course, the practice owner, but as the associate as well.
Well, really as whoever was the provider.
Yeah.
Whoever was the provider. So we hear a lot. I hear this through the grapevine, through board people, but somebody who works for a corporation, they're like, well, the corporation, they wouldn't allow me to do this with the billing, or they wouldn't allow this, or that. It doesn't matter. It's you're the doctor. So it's like they wouldn't let me use a rubber dam. Nope. Bring your own damn rubber dam, then. You know what I mean? Like, that's just not going to fly at the state board. You are still the provider. So like the patient wants their records. And you didn't know because the corporation never told you that they didn't send the records within 30 days. And now you're on the line for it. Yeah, you're on the line for it. That sucks. Mm-hmm. But that's, and I'm just through corporation, but that could happen in my office at any point. It makes me so nervous.
Yeah. Yeah. It is worth being, you've got to do what's right by the patient. You've got to do right by the documentation for that patient. As doctors, you have to check to make sure that your assumption about what your staff is doing on your behalf is actually being done. I mean, there's just a lot, and I know it's not the most glamorous topic.
It's nauseating.
It is nauseating, but it is essential, and I think you see it from so many different sides. And again, why the chart audit program even exists is because you knew this is the area of the practice that often falls short. Often. And your goal is to advocate to get that to where that's not what's going to be the noose around your neck if and when something ends up happening. So it's an important time to re-look at everything and figure out how you're doing on the documentation side of things. Are you protecting yourself? And if you don't know, this is where you call us, because again, that's the whole point of our chart audit program, is to help you protect yourself, essentially. So awesome. Thanks for chatting with me about it today.
Thanks for joining the conversation today. We hope that you are comforted in knowing that you are not alone, but we also hope that you're walking away with some really great tips and tricks to try in your practice. We value your feedback, so please take a few moments to rate and review the podcast. Finally, we want to make sure that we're covering the topics that matter to you. So track us down on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, and let us know what topics you want us to cover. As always, please know that we are rooting for you today as you manage your dental drama.